My grandma and I walked inside the nursing home together, and there sitting in his recliner was Chuck watching the football game with his favorite music playing. Chuck had been living in the nursing home for quite some time. My grandmother had been like a second mother to him. She had cleaned his family's house for over 20 years, and when his parents passed away, she promised them that she would take care of Chuck. As we entered his room, Chuck sat there, stretched out, feet up on his recliner. Now, to know my grandma, Mayola, you have to know that she doesn't hold anything back. Chuck is so excited to see her, and he yells out, Mayola, but she doesn't even greet him, and she yells at him and says, Chuck, what's wrong with your feet? It was obvious that Chuck's feet hadn't been cared for. They were scarred up, built up, dryness, cracking all over. And I thought for a moment that I was going to have to hold her back from going to the nurse's station, but she calmed down for just a moment, pulled up a chair to his recliner and grabbed a rag and soap and water and began to wash his feet, scrubbing deeply and intensely into each crevice. Of course, she couldn't do it without giving Chuck a lecture, and when Chuck shared with her that he couldn't reach his feet, she said, you better learn to try. After she dried his feet with a towel, she rubbed cocoa butter deeply into the cracks and massaging his feet. She looked up at Chuck and smiled and said, now you're ready. I don't know what he was ready for, maybe for the day, maybe for something deeper, maybe for something more meaningful, but either way, he was ready. The passage appears in both Matthew and Luke with significant differences. It's set at Simon's house during one of his grand dinner parties, and suddenly an unnamed woman rushes into the house and goes straight to Jesus and kneels down at his feet and begins to bathe his feet in this costly perfume. And Simon, as you can imagine, is deeply disturbed and angry because you don't interrupt a good dinner party. And Jesus looks at Simon and says, do you see her? Simon, do you see her? But in the Gospel of John, the focus is more than just her. The scene takes place at the home of one of Jesus' dear friends, Lazarus, Mary, and Martha, 6 days before Passover. And the author of John writes in such a way that invites you to notice both what is happening and what is about to happen. Just one chapter earlier, Jesus called Lazarus to rise from the dead, demonstrating his power over death and proving that he is the resurrection and the life. Only a few will realize that Jesus too will undergo a similar transformation to Lazarus. And while Jesus is speaking with Lazarus, Martha is serving. I imagine that Mary glances at Jesus and thinks to herself, what is going on with his feet? And then she realized he's walked miles and miles healing the sick, proclaiming new truths, challenging unjust, reckless laws, and being cast out of cities and communities. His feet bore the evidence of the journey. The scars and the cracks told the story of his mission, of his work, of his life, of who he was. And Mary ran to her room and got the perfume and began to lavish a year's worth onto Jesus' feet. Scrubbing deeply and intensely, massaging into the cracks and the crevices, and taking her hair and drying them, soothing them. And I imagine she looks up at Jesus and says, now you're ready. Now you're ready for your death. The anointed one has now been anointed. It's a bit surprising that Mary anoints not Jesus' head, but his feet. As one scholar notes, Jesus will enter Jerusalem as the anointed one, but anointed not on his head as expected for a king, but on his feet. He was anointed not by the high priest, but a woman. Jesus' entry into Jerusalem and his identity as Messiah will not fit neatly into the preconceived expectations. And we'll get to that part next Sunday. And then there's Judas. Judas criticized Mary not because he actually cares for the poor, because he wants to take the money to steal from the poor. And we as Christians use this quote often, that the poor will always be with you, but we usually take it out of context, because what Jesus isn't implying that we should ignore the poor and accept inequality and inequity. Instead, he's alluding to Deuteronomy 15:11, for the poor will never cease out of the land. Therefore, I command you to open wide your hand to the needy and to the poor among you. So let's stop misusing that quote. Jesus isn't condemning Mary for what she owns or for what she pours out onto him. Her act is one of humility and love and sacrifice and worship and a deep friendship. Friendship. It all started in 1955 when a red Thunderbird convertible drove by Willie Mae's house several times before stopping. Two men got out of the car, but Willie Mae couldn't stop staring at the scrawny white boy that stayed at the car. The older man talked to her, and it turned out that they really did want something from her. Years earlier, Willie Mae had written and produced a song that didn't take off, and they wanted to buy the rights for $1,000. So she sold them. The next year, Willie Mae's kids called her screaming that scrawny boy was on TV singing her song, now a hit. He was everywhere, and she never expected to see him again. But on Christmas of 1957, he showed up at her door. She invited him inside the house, and he wanted to ask Willie Mae one question. What did the song mean? She didn't give him an answer. She figured since he was making so much money off of it, he didn't need to know the meaning. Before he left, he gave her a brand new Cadillac to say thank you. Over the years, they formed a deep friendship, exchanging letters while he was on tour, and he shared how no one truly knew him except for her. He bought her a farm, and she said, "What am I going to do with 500 acres?" He bought her a mansion, and she said, "I'm good with my shack, but thank you." In 1968, while eating fried chicken and chitlins, he told her he finally understood that it wasn't about the words of the song, but the feeling of the song. She smiled and nodded her head. And it was in that moment that he picked up the phone and called Johnny Carson. A few days later, he introduced Willie Mae, known as Big Mama Thornton, on the Ed Sullivan Show, where she performed her song and his, Hound Dog. The story isn't just about Elvis. It's about Willie Mae and her faithfulness and friendship, seeing beyond the fame to care for his soul. The faithful friend that journeyed and joined with him, that understood when the rest of the world just wanted him for his fame and fortune, she was there to care for his scars. It's like the story of Mary and Jesus. Crowds and crowds and crowds seeking in, wanting something from Jesus, but Mary is there to care for his scars, his soul, to be his friend. And what the Gospel of John tells us is that the faithful and the unfaithful still receive grace. If you haven't gotten it yet, much like the disciples, we are walking toward the death of Jesus with him. And we lavish our praise and adoration upon him, but we too can see the scars and the cracks before the nails go into him. We can be the faithful friend that takes life savings and says, only you matter, God. Let me lavish and pour my heart and all that I have up onto you. But even in the midst of these sacred moments, there still will be Judases around to undermine the sacrifice. This text reminds us all of sacrifice, but also death. But if anything, Lazarus' place in the system is a constant reminder that death will not have the last word, that Lent is a constant reminder of death and sacrifice. It's a reminder of our own lives being worthy of sacrifice to God. Let's step back for just a moment. Sacrifice are also known as korbanot in the Hebrew Bible, were used to draw people closer to God. The Israelites will go up to the priest and offer sacrifices of grain or money or animals, and the priest in turn will offer this sacrifice to God. And this was the main process used to connect with God, that they would give up their prized possessions as a symbol of their dedication to God, and this became an important practice in worship. We've seen how sacrifices have been changed or even challenged through the Old Testament and Hebrew Bible, where we have seen it where animals asking for animal sacrifices of money and grains, and then finally we get to Jeremiah and Micah, and they begin to tell you, no, I don't want animals, no, I don't want your grains, I don't want your offerings, but I want your life. You. Sacrifice in its broadest sense is the act of giving something up, something value or important for the sake of something else. Mary seizes an opportunity to use what she had been holding on to for such a time as this. What is it that we need to give up or let go for the sake of being closer to God? And I'm not talking about a fast here. There's a difference between the two. A true sacrifice of letting it go and pouring out every drop. Both involve self-denial, but they are distinct concepts with different purposes and practices. Fasting typically refers to the act of voluntarily abstaining from food or drink or certain activities for a period of time, a way of cleansing the body. Sacrifice involves giving up something of value for a higher purpose out of devotion, to honor God, to express our gratitude to God, to show our commitment to God. Jesus chooses his life. Will you choose yours? Making your life a living testament unto God.